June 3rd, 1935 was unquestionably one of New York Harbor's greatest days. Tugs, yachts, fireboats, excursion steamers, and spraying fireboats were all out in force. Special charter planes flew overhead, and a blimp hovered about. Flags waved and horns tooted and sirens blared as crowds cheered, applauded, and even wept at times. In the midst of this enduring depression, a great ray of sunlight, as one reporter called it, was coming from France, albeit 2 years behind schedule. Said to be the most spectacular liner of all time, the $60 million Normandie was arriving on her maiden voyage. Radiant in her fresh paint and dressed in flags, she also flew a long pennant that identified her as the new Blue Ribbon champion. On her maiden crossing, she broke the record of Italy's Rex. Normandy was, of course, something of a giant step and a big gamble for the French. They had never built a ship of such mammoth proportions and exceptional might. By some measure, she was almost twice the size of their previous flagship, the Ile-de-France. Record-breaking, prestigious, the supreme symbol of all that is France, the Normandie, however, never fully realized the grand hopes she had inspired. Ask any individual to draw a classic ocean liner. Chances are it will have the following: a long, sleek hull with a clipper-like bow, a modest white superstructure, but standing out above the rest, several large funnels billowing clouds of smoke from the belly of the ship. Chances are pretty good that it will mimic, in a lot of ways, to what historian John Maxstone Graham called the ocean liner. The story of the future SS Normandie began as far back as the early 1920s. For almost the entirety of their existence, ocean liners and their respective owners have focused on the immigration trade. After all, that is one of the criteria for a ship to be called an ocean liner, that is, to have the purpose of moving people and cargo from point A to point B. Towards the latter half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, the destination for the majority of these immigrants was Canada and the United States. Part of the reasons that liners kept getting bigger and bigger as the years went by was that there was a very high demand for carrying passengers of this type. It was a very profitable industry. However, that all came to a crashing halt by 1924 as the United States imposed immigration laws that dropped the curtain on unrestricted immigration into the country. Suddenly, liners and their companies had to make a drastic shift from how things were. They had to attract different kinds of passengers. Each one found different solutions to this problem. In its early years, the French line primarily focused on immigration. Then there began to be a shift in attitudes in the first decade of the 1900s. This was seen very well in the SS France of 1912. It was the beginning of a new age for this line. As the years went on, the French line began to put out even more elaborate and signature-like liners. SS Paris and SS Ile-de-France are the best example of this. Each of these new ships attracted more sophisticated passengers, especially cultured middle-class Americans. Something that also developed from these ships was the idea of having each of these express liners representing not only the best France had to offer, but as a symbol that the entirety of the French population could take enormous pride in. Then came the year 1929. The Norddeutscher Lloyd Company commissioned two new, stunning ocean liners for their express run, SS Bremen and SS Europa. These new vessels would usher in a new shipbuilding race, and would help give rise to a new type of design and architecture, both on land and at sea: modernism. Not only were they stunning in looks, they were incredibly efficient and fast. They easily snatched the blue ribbon away from the then antiquated RMS Mauritania of the Cunard line. Liners companies around the globe knew they needed to respond. The French were no different. They didn't want to make any old ship. They wanted a liner that would be larger, faster, bolder, and more efficient than any ship yet built, or even dreamed of. She would be the ultimate showpiece of the nation of France, and would be an influence on ship design forevermore. She would also be the first blue ribbon holder for the nation. Above all, she would need to be a national symbol, something the entire population would rally behind and adore. With this in mind, the design process began. Early in that process, the company was approached by a rather unknown naval architect named Vladimir Yurkovich, whom had fled Imperial Russia during the October Revolution of 1917. He proposed to the company that a new ship have a radically different hull design than traditional ocean liners, a streamlined and aerodynamic hull with a clipper-like bow along with a bulbous bow. He had actually approached Cunard with this idea for their upcoming Superliner, then known as Hull 534, but they rejected the idea. Not ship-like, they thought. However, the French line executives decided to give his ideas a try. After some hull form and model testing, they found that this strange design increased the efficiency of the vessel by more than a fifth, while still maintaining the same expected speed. His ideas were quickly approved, and so the radical shape of this new ship was born. The Chantiers de l'Antique shipyard in Saint-Nazaire, France, was chosen to construct the new vessel, now titled Project T6. Then came the first of many trials for the future ocean liner. The Wall Street crash of 1929 caused economic depression on a global scale. Many nations and industries were severely impacted. In coming years, ocean liner companies were facing financial ruin and a collapse of their fleets, among which was Cunard's Hull 534, which was put on hold with its hull 80% complete for the next 2 years, and White Star's RMMV Oceanic, which had to be cancelled just after construction had started. Despite the economic turmoil, the French line continued to press forward with their project. With general designs complete, the keel laying of T6 occurred on the 26th of January, 1931. Construction continued with steady progress. Before the coming launch, a name needed to be chosen. Many have put forward and suggested names such as La Belle France, President Paul Dumour, Maurice Charvier, Jean d'Arc, and General Pershing. The day finally came on the 29th of October, 1932. Over 200,000 people gathered around the towering hull, including President Albert Lebrun and his wife. In the days previous, the slipway had been covered in 43 tons of soap and 2.5 tons of lard. The hull weighed an estimated 27,657 tons, more than any ship yet built. At the appointed time, Madame Lebrun performed the christening ceremony. T6 was named Normandie, and the hull began to slide into the River Loire. As it did so, thousands of tons of water was forced away from the hull, which created a wave that soaked or knocked over more than 100 spectators. Soon, Normandy, covered in flags from bow to stern, was guided by several tugs to the fitting out berth. Fitting out on her machinery then commenced. One prominent feature that was quickly noted by spectators was the split funnel uptakes, a very brilliant but expensive innovation that allowed uninterrupted public spaces and hallways that had only been seen on Hapag ships Vaterland and Bismarck. By now, the rivalry between France and Britain over Normandy and Hull 534 was at its highest yet. At one point, before Normandie's funnels were installed, the French line bragged about how her funnels would decrease in height from front to back. In response, Cunard adjusted Hull 534's funnel design so that they would do the same, and so they could say, "Well, so does ours." By July 1934, construction was still ongoing but moving along slowly. The Great Depression was making the speed of construction difficult to maintain. French line had to continually go back to the government and ask for loans. But because the public was so caught up in her, they didn't seem to have a problem in giving them those loans. They too, secretly, were proud of her. The only ones who seemed to mind were those involved with the newspapers. The continual delays forced the desired main voyage day to be pushed back about a year to June 1935, which was actually good because that was the peak of the transatlantic season. On the 27th of March 1935, 2 months before her planned maiden voyage, Normandie moved for the first time since her launching to the world's largest dry dock where her propellers would be installed and her exterior painted. Her final big test came in early May of 1935. Normandie conducted her sea trials off the coast of Brittany for 6 days. Planes were all around her as various tests were conducted, of which the most anticipated was her high-speed run where she surpassed 32 knots. On May 11, 1935, Normandie entered Le Havre for the first time after completing her sea trials successfully. She docked at the French line's new and updated pier, which had been designed with Normandie in mind. 18 days of last-minute changes, fixes, and preparation followed. By late May, Normandie was complete. She had cost an astonishing $60 million to build. At 79,280 gross registered tons, she was the largest ship in the world. And at 1,029 feet in length, she was the first liner to exceed 1,000 feet in length. Her interiors were extraordinary and exquisite. She was far above anyone's wildest dreams of what a liner could be, and soon she would try to claim her title as the fastest ship afloat. In those last frantic days leading up to the main voyage, the French people could not talk about anything else. International press, especially in America, whipped the public into a frenzy over her coming maiden voyage and possible speed record. However, the French line decided to play the safety card and denied any idea of Normandie going for the blue ribbon. Few believed them. After many years of designing, construction, and uncertainty, the big day finally came. Normandie departed Le Havre for New York at 6:30 p.m. with 50,000 watching. After a brief stopover in Southampton, her quest for the blue ribbon began. By May 31st, the signs were already looking good. A new record had been achieved as she covered 744 nautical miles in one day at an average speed of 29.76 knots. Even with the high winds and heavy swells, she averaged 31.5 knots in one 6-hour period. A few days later, Normandie approached the mouth of New York Harbor, surrounded by 5 excursion boats and 5 Coast Guard vessels, all packed with people. Another 100,000 were waiting for her arrival in New York. She crossed the Atlantic in 4 days, 3 hours, and 2 minutes at an average speed of 29.98 knots. The westbound blue ribbon was hers. A 30-meter-long blue pennant was hoisted on her mast, and even passengers were given a bronze medallion. French Line had clearly come prepared for a celebration. As she proudly steamed up the East River, she was surrounded by smaller vessels and planes. The captain of the SS Rex, the now former holder of the blue ribbon, sent a message to Normandie. Our sincere admiration for a splendid ship and remarkable performance on her maiden voyage enables us to relinquish, with a smile, our possession of the blue ribbon of the North Atlantic 2 years ago. She docked at the unfinished Pier 88 with thousands watching just ahead of her. Her maiden voyage was complete, and she had successfully fulfilled her mission. For the next few days, Normandie was open to the public. 27,891 were able to get on board for a 40-minute tour. 350 policemen were drafted to be able to get control of the crowds around her. Soon she left for her return maiden voyage. With her arrival in Southampton, the miracle was complete. She was able to win the second half of the blue ribbon after she had crossed in just 4 days, 3 hours, and 25 minutes at 30.31 knots, making her the first ship ever in history to be able to cross at an average speed more of 30 knots. With the blue ribbon won, Normandie settled into a regular transatlantic schedule and, during the winter of 1935, was taken out of service to install more conservative propellers that helped reduce vibrations and receive some needed upgrades. The additional work increased Normandie's tonnage from 79,280 to 83,423. She re-entered service on May 6, 1936, just before her arrival. Hull 534, now named RMS Queen Mary, started her maiden voyage. On the 27th of May 1936, Queen Mary left Southampton on her maiden voyage. Everyone expected that she would break Normandie's speed record and snatch the blue ribbon away. The French held their breath. However, only a day out of New York, poor weather forced her to slow down considerably, and she was unable to win. She arrived 3 hours behind Normandy. The French nation breathed a sigh of relief. On the 22nd of June 1936, while on an eastbound voyage at nearly full capacity, a Royal Air Force seaplane came just a little too close to Normandy. A wingtip snapped one of the deck cranes that was holding a car. The crane and car collapsed onto the deck. Somehow, the plane continued on but ran into the hot gases coming out of the forward funnel and crashed onto the forward bow. The pilot stepped out without a scratch and no fire developed. Just as things seemed to be getting normal for Normandy, the rivalry bit back at her. In mid-August, Queen Mary captured the Blue Ribbon at average speeds of 30.14 and 30.63 knots. During her 1937 winter refit, a third set of propellers were added, which solved the vibration problem and slightly increased her speed. They had good reason. The French did not design Normandy to be a runner-up to the Queen Mary. Italy had also announced that Rex was going to try for it again as well. On March 19, 1937, Normandy left for her first eastbound crossing of the year. She broke another 24-hour speed record after traveling 781 miles at 31.65 knots. She arrived in Southampton on March 23, flying the Blue Ribbon pennant once again. She had crossed in 4 days and 6 minutes at 30.99 knots. In early August, Normandy broke her own record again, but surprisingly the British seemed not to care as much and they kept Queen Mary in regular service. Behind the scenes, however, they very much cared. The following year, Queen Mary captured the Blue Ribbon again. It seemed that the rivalry would never end. Normandy's captain sent a message to the Queen Mary which ended with, "Bravo to the Queen Mary." Until the next time. Unbeknownst to the French line, things were going to be getting a lot worse for Normandy, and for them. Throughout her life, Normandy rarely exceeded 60% occupancy rates on her voyages. While she did not require regular government subsidies for her to operate, she never made a profit. And while she was very beloved by her passengers and countrymen, for many on the North Atlantic, it would be the Queen Mary that won out in popularity. In 1936, Normandy carried 27,292 passengers, while Queen Mary had 42,032 travel aboard her. The following year, Normandy had 37,524 and 36 crossings, which was an improvement over the last year. But Queen Mary had also improved. She carried 56,252 passengers and 42 crossings. Unfortunately for Normandy, her biggest strengths were also her biggest weaknesses. Her stunning decor was somewhat overpowering for many. Normandy also devoted so much of her public spaces to first class, while on most other liners, especially Queen Mary, it was fairly balanced between second and tourist. The market was fairly different to what French line was used to and had forecasted. Come 1938, things really began to decline as the situation in Europe began to blacken, as Nazi Germany was growing and was getting more and more aggressive. Normandy often ran only about a quarter full at this time, and there were numerous cancellations each voyage. The situation in Europe did not seem to be getting any better as time went on, and it seemed that war was just around the corner. Normandy continued to suffer with having so few traveling aboard her. However, on August 14th of 1939, Normandie did have one more successful voyage when she carried celebrities and film crews that were involved in the filming of Paris, New York. This crossing would be her last round-trip voyage. On August 23, 1939, Normandie left Le Havre for her 139th crossing. This would be the last time she would see her home. Her next scheduled eastbound crossing was on August 30th. The day of sailing, U.S. Customs conducted a thorough inspection of the ship to look for any cargo that could be used for war. They did the same on the liners Bremen and Aquitania, whom were also leaving that night. While her passengers waited at Pier 88, Normandie received very disturbing news from Paris. She was not to leave and shall remain in port until further notice. All passengers and cargo were transferred to Aquitania. During the evening, Aquitania and Bremen left the dimly lit Normandie behind. No one knew it yet, but Normandie's life was coming to an end. World War II commenced on the 1st of September 1939. Just 2 days later, France declared war on Germany. That same day, the US government unofficially seized Normandy. She was now truly stuck. A skeleton crew of 115 would remain on board for maintenance and regular upkeep. 60 special agents were posted to guard her at all times. Soon thereafter, as Normandy sat patiently in Pier 88 for any news, her rival Queen Mary arrived in New York. For the next 5 months, the two rivals sat side by side. In March of 1940, they were joined by the RMS Queen Elizabeth, whom had just took the title of largest ship in the world from Normandy. It would be the only time that the three largest ships ever built would be together. On March 31st, Queen Mary left Normandy behind to begin her duties as a troop ship. By late June of 1940, the invasion of France was complete, and Nazi Germany claimed that the French line had been dissolved and that Normandy was now theirs. Thankfully, the U.S. government denied the claim and jurisdiction was given to the United States Coast Guard. They placed an additional 150 troops to guard her. On November 12, 1940, Queen Elizabeth left New York for war duties. Normandy was now truly on her own. A feature article in Pick, a New York picture magazine, described life aboard the ghost ship. Our first impression was that of a dank, inactive mechanism, gigantic in size, straining to unleash its dormant power. Many of the crew have not heard from their families since the fall of France. New York is hospitable to these anxious men. Leading motion picture theaters send them passes. One East Side restaurant, Marché regularly invites Normandie's seamen as restaurant guests. The men watch over the sleeping Normandy as though it were some living thing to be awakened in a happier time. On April 11, 1941, President Roosevelt asked for legislation that would allow him to seize Normandy for conversion for war duties. By now, rumors had begun to spread that she would be rebuilt into an aircraft carrier. While Normandy's fate was being decided, the skeleton crew continued to watch over her. Her extensive fire suppression system was manned 24 hours a day. It was one of the most well-designed and elaborate systems ever seen on a ship. Normandy's fate was still being debated when, on the 7th of December 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked. War was declared the next day, and it did not take long for Normandy to be requisitioned along with 13 other French ships in U.S. ports. On December 12th, the skeleton crew was dismissed, and she was now under the mercy of the United States Navy. On December 31st, she received the new name Lafayette. Her conversion into a troop ship quickly commenced. Within a few months, about 2,500 truckloads of all of Normandy's interior fittings had been taken to various warehouses for storage. Her extensive fire suppression system was never manned. Her scheduled departure from New York was to be on the 14th of February, but she was never going to have the chance to leave. At 3 in the afternoon on the 9th of February, New York Mayor LaGuardia was on the radio with WNYC talking about subway fares. He was handed a note and immediately left the room. He had just been told that the Lafayette was burning. About 30 minutes earlier, a workman by the name of Clement Derrick had carelessly but accidentally ignited a pile of flight jackets while using a welding torch in the first-class lounge. The fire quickly spread around the top 3 decks. Vladimir Yurkovich, the ship's designer, was among the huge crowd gathering outside the pier. Seeing the alarming list, he pleaded with the commanding officer, Adolphus Andrews, to let him on board and allow him to open the seacocks. By doing so, she would settle only a few feet and remain upright. There would be no chance of her capsizing. Andrews denied him by saying, "This is a Navy job." With that one statement, the fate of the Normandie had been sealed. Within the late hours of the night, Andrews ordered all press away from the area as the ship was clearly going to capsize. He felt it would be easier to control the blame game if they were not present. Sure enough, at 2:45 in the morning on the 10th of February, Lafayette rolled over onto her side. The once proud Normandy, the pride and embodiment of France, a holder of the blue ribbon, and one of the most iconic and picturesque ships of all time, was dead. She was now nothing more than a smoking wreck. In September 1946, President Truman signed an executive order of the dismantling and scrapping of the Normandie. After more than one attempt by Yurkovich to partially save her was denied, the rusting hull was sent to Port Newark, where scrapping began in October. The last piece of her, a 75-ton section of one of the boiler rooms on the starboard side, was raised from the water on the 6th of October, 1947. By December 1948, the scrapping operation was finished.